A few years ago, we constructed and tested the Raptor 700RR, a nearly 50-inch wide version of the Raptor that we'd like to see Yamaha bring to market. It utilized Hauser Racing plus 2 standard travel A-arms, an RPM Dominator 2 axle regarded by most pro ATV racers as the strongest money can buy, and a set of revalved and resprung stock shocks. The shock work helped improve bottoming resistance. Although they weren't set up to lower the machine's ride height, the added width did improve stability and handling significantly. Next up for the 700RR, we decided to put the Raptor 700 Big 3 engine upgrades to the test. The result was a thrilling to ride 53 to 54 horsepower torque monster that exploited the higher center of gravity that accompanied having our stock shocks reworked without having them set up to lower the ATV's ride height and center of gravity. At this point, we knew we wanted to do something a little different with the shocks. Ron Elmore, owner of Rocket Ron Racing out of Attica, Indiana, has been racing, building race quads, and tuning ATV suspension since the 1980s. They specialize in revolving and setting up OEM shocks, other manufacturers' aftermarket shocks, in addition to offering general shock maintenance, having tuned for numerous racers. We asked Ron if he could help us get the most out of our Raptor's OEM shocks, and he was confident that we'd like the results. With that, our shocks were off the Raptor, boxed up, and on their way. A few weeks later, our shocks were back in our possession, revalved, resprung, and restyled. Most noticeable at first glance is the new look, which can be customized to match the look of your ATV. The shock body's color was changed to black, with the springs powder coated to match the look of our Raptor. For our setup, Ron recommended that we utilize a Hess Linkage. They often recommend Hess Linkages for average to lighter weight riders of all disciplines. Constructed in the US of billet aluminum, the Hess Link is said to lower the back of the quad around an inch and reduces the ramp up in firmness throughout the stroke, allowing you to more easily access full travel with less mid-stroke harshness. Of course, we told Rocket Ron we wanted it all, a ride that's plush over small bumps from roots and rocks on the trail, while still being able to absorb big jump landings on the motocross track without excessive bottoming. The shock's transformation begins by selecting new springs and valving, chosen for the rider's weight, ability level, type of riding, and machine setup. A single spring setup was chosen for the rear shock, allowing the linkage to handle progression. Up front, Rocket Ron used a triple rate spring setup with a tender spring nearly zeroed out, helping us get the ride height down. They maintain the use of the shock's stock pistons, feeling that they offer plenty of oil flow. Controlling damping, Ron sets the shock shim stacks up with what he refers to as a disappearing bleed. It's said to allow additional oil passage to prevent initial high-speed harshness and improve small bump sensitivity, closing off as the shim stack opens up.
Older sport ATV shocks were not very good. Shocks for ATVs today, for race quads and sport quads, have come a long way. You can rebuild them, you can service them, you can tune them, and make them work as well as any aftermarket shock out there.
With testing planned for the motocross track, we dropped the ride height as much as possible with the 21-inch front and 20-inch rear YFZ 450R tires we had installed on our Raptor. Our ride height was set at 8.5 inches front and 7.5 inches rear. With only about a third of the front shock shaft still showing, we'd set up our Raptor about as low as it could go. A couple last-second changes included the installation of a set of Texera Tech front brake line clamps. They're constructed of aluminum and are tiny, weighing virtually nothing. Held in place by zip ties, they allow enough movement and rotation that if you snag a branch with a brake line, they could make the difference between breaking the line or not. Lastly, a TRX 450R foam filter from Unifilter was clamped onto our Raptor's fuel customs intake, increasing protection. They do well at keeping dust out, while still allowing good airflow to the engine. Maxima Fab 1 air filter oil helps maximize the filter's effectiveness. As a spray, it allows for easy, even coating of the filter.
I'm Leon Spinden. I'm an ATV racer racing the 25 plus junior and 38 plus AB classes at the ATV MX Nationals. I'm also the team manager of 4130 Motorsports, as well as the mechanic for Jaden Launderville, who is a pro sport pro-am racer at the ATV MX Nationals. I currently own 12 sport ATVs, ranging from stock to projects to full-blown race bikes. So I've had a nice wide range of sport ATVs that I've been able to ride, as well as having the opportunity to ride stock Raptor 700Rs in the past. And I got to ride the ATV on demand Raptor 700RR today using the Rocket Ron revalved and resprung shocks.
Certainly qualified to evaluate our shocks. We met up with Leon at East Fork MX near New Vienna, Ohio, ran by former cross-country champion Scott Plessinger. It's the home track of his son, Supercross racer Aaron Plessinger. We were fortunate to get a full day of testing with our quad on their two incredible tracks.
Initial thoughts on the Raptor 700RR with the revalved shocks compared to a stock one. The damping controls a lot better with the revalved and resprung shocks. You're able to get a lot more adjustment out of it, especially on the motocross track.
After some initial testing, we went in most of the way on the front shocks high and low speed compression damping to further reduce body roll and increase bottoming resistance with the front shocks riding so low in their travel.
Starting out the day here at East Fork MX, we hit the hillside track behind me. Real tame. There was some deep, tacky dirt bike ruts in the corners, which you hit those on the Raptor and it soaked them up pretty well. The jumps, never once bottomed out on any of the jumps on this track, but everything soaked it up really well, and you could hit this track all day long on this ATV and not get tired. After that, we went to the main track here, which has some bigger jumps, a little more technical. Some of the corners were freshly plowed and kind of marbly on top. In the corners, nothing once, the bike never got upset. There was a couple times where it bottomed out on the track just from intentionally landing short on a couple of jumps. But even when you would bottom out, it wasn't too hard. You would scrape skid plate a couple times, but you never once felt a really hard jar from bottoming out on this machine. So the shocks really soaked up a lot of this track. Even for the weight and setup of the Raptor 700 being standard travel, it really handled it well, and you could tell these shocks were set up for this machine. When you take the Raptor 700RR off the smaller bumps, you feel connected to the bike, so you know that they're there, but the shocks are nice and plush, they soak it up. You don't get any jarring, it doesn't set the chassis off balance at all. And it just really soaks them up really well. Once you do that, get past the small ones, get to some of the medium-sized bumps or the rollers, that's where the 700's torque really comes in handy too, because especially over rollers, you can carry that front end, give the front shocks a little bit of a break, and the rear end soaks it all up. You can kind of carry the rear end through them while keeping the front end up in the air, or at least just kind of skipping off the top. That rear shock, especially for the motocross track, is spot on. You wouldn't have any issues on the trails with it at all. You could be comfortable all day long. That thing just soaked up everything between the shock being revalved and the Hess linkage on the back. I don't know much of a better option for this machine. Once you get to the bigger jumps, that's where this thing feels more like a YFZ than a big Raptor 700. It flies through the air real similar to a Yamaha YFZ 450R, being the wider stance and then the shocks on top of that. Coming into the corners on the Raptor, granted this does have taller tires on it. If you were really setting this thing up for a motocross track, you'd have smaller tires, 18s in the back, 20s on the front instead of the 21s and 20s. But compared to a stock 700 Raptor that doesn't have the wider stance and the shocks done, this thing stays planted in the corners. It doesn't have the tippy feeling. You still have a taller seat height compared to a 450, but you don't notice it as much as a stock Raptor 700. Being that this machine fares so well on the motocross track, if you were to take it into the woods, you could easily set this up as a really comfortable, long-lasting trail bike that you could go out all day long on. We have the shocks, especially the front shocks, cranked pretty hard for what these settings allow. If you wanted to have a more plush ride on the trails, you could raise the ride height up, give you a little bit more preload, and then soften up the compression, especially the compression on these shocks. And that would give you a real nice ride on the trail. And this machine, with all the stuff that's done to it, makes it a real well-rounded machine that you could take on the track. You could take it in the trails, you could throw some different tires on it, take in the dunes, and you can have fun and go pretty hard no matter what you're doing all day long. Coming into today, I figured I was gonna come out here to the track and ride it around a little bit, but I didn't think I was gonna have as much fun as I did. After riding this thing all day long, being able to hit these jumps, this Raptor flies straight as an arrow over the jumps. It's so effortless to hit 90% of the jumps on these tracks and be confident that if I do overshoot one of the smaller doubles, it's not gonna hurt. If I do come up a little short on something, it's not gonna hurt. It's gonna take everything, soak it up, and I can continue on to the next section of the track. So overall, with this shock setup, with these A-arms, with the axle, bringing the stance of this machine lower and wider, it's a great ATV, and I could ride this thing all day long and not have an issue.
Rocket Ron's shock revalve and respring retails for a very reasonable $1,050 for all three shocks. That's easily $1,500 less expensive, or even more, than a full set of premium quality aftermarket shocks. We believe there are some slight advantages to high-dollar, long-travel aftermarket suspension. However, the performance gains for the dollar make it pretty unwarranted for the average recreational rider. If we lived out west, we wouldn't hesitate to install a kill switch and enter this Raptor in a works race out in the desert. Or try our hand at a local motocross race. Rocket Ron's revalved shocks are certainly up to it. If you're interested in improving your Raptor's handling and suspension performance while maintaining a width closer to stock for cross-country racing or tight trails, Rocket Ron can certainly help you with that as well. Blacking out the bodies and having the springs custom powder coated added a modest $150 to the cost of our shocks. The Hess Linkage was certainly an integral part of improving our Raptor's handling and suspension. For $175, making it part of your Raptor suspension upgrade and having your rear shock set up to work with it is a no-brainer. We'd add it with a revalved stock rear shock as we've done, or even a full aftermarket shock setup should you feel the need.
If you are looking to get your shocks set up by Rocket Ron, I would say contact them immediately and get your shocks sent into them so you can get a lot better ride for a really good budget.